Welcome, listeners, to another journey into the dark. Settle in, lock your doors, and let the outside world fade away. You are listening to Stories, Fables, Ghostly Tales, and I am your host, the Tale Teller. Tonight, we are going to explore the architecture of human survival and what happens when the architecture that supports it collapses. As a species, we are hardwired to live. It is our most base, fundamental programming. If we are cold, our brains tell us to seek warmth. If we are hungry, our bodies scream at us to eat. If we are in danger, our adrenaline floods our veins and forces us to fight or run. It is an airtight, evolutionary fail-safe designed to keep us breathing. But sometimes that fail-safe breaks. Sometimes the human mind decides to abandon every instinct it has ever known, leading the body into situations that defy all logic, all reason, and all sanity. In this extended episode again, we are going to look at two of the most baffling psychological mysteries in modern history. Two cases where a group of men marched deliberately, willingly, into their own bizarre demises. We will look at evidence that makes no sense, timelines that contradict reality, and the terrifying possibility that sometimes the most dangerous place on Earth is inside our own heads. Our first story takes us down to South America, to a time of political upheaval, technological explosion, and a rising obsession with the skies above. The year is 1966. We are in the city of Niterói, just across the bay from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It is a beautiful, sprawling metropolitan area framed by steep, jungle-covered hills that rise up like green monoliths. It is August 20th. An 18-year-old boy named Jorge da Costa Alves is hiking up the side of the Morro do Vintém hill. He's up there to fly a kite, taking advantage of the winds that sweep off the Atlantic. The terrain is rough, overgrown, and steep. As Jorge navigates the thick brush, the wind shifts. He catches a scent. It is a smell that, once experienced, is never forgotten. The heavy, sweet, sickening odor of decay. He follows the scent off the narrow trail, pushing aside the dense foliage, until he stumbles into a small natural clearing. What he finds there will baffle the Brazilian police, ignite a frenzy in the international press, and spawn a mystery that remains unsolved over half a century later. Lying side by side in the dirt are the bodies of two men. At first glance, the scene is completely surreal. The men are not dressed for a hike in the jungle. They are wearing sharp, formal, tailored suits. Over their suits, despite the fact that they are lying in dirt, they are wearing brand new, identical, waterproof coats. There are no signs of a struggle, no blood, no defensive wounds. The vegetation around them is undisturbed. They are resting peacefully, side by side, as if they simply lay down to take a nap and never woke up. But it's what is on their faces that turns this from a tragic discovery into a profound, terrifying enigma. Resting over the eyes of both men are heavy, crude, hand-cut masks made of solid lead, the kind of lead used to block radiation. The boy, terrified, runs down the hill and alerts the authorities. When the police and firefighters finally make the difficult trek up the Morro do Vintém, they process the scene, and the details only make the picture darker. Beside the men, they find an empty plastic water bottle and a packet containing 2 wet towels, and in the pocket of one of the men they find a small notebook. The detectives open the notebook. Inside, scribbled in Portuguese, is a timeline. It is not a diary. It is an instruction manual for their own deaths. It reads, 1630, Está no local determinado. 1630, be at the agreed place. 1830, and I do apologize for butchering this, Ingredi cápsulas após efeito protege metais aguarda sinal mascara. 1830, swallow capsules, after effect protect metals, wait for mask signal. Swallow capsules, protect metals, wait for the mask signal. Who are these men? And what exactly were they waiting for? The police quickly identify them. Their names are Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel Jose Viana. They are not local to Niterói. They are from Campos dos Goitacazes, a city several hours away. And here is the detail that makes the cryptic instructions even more bizarre. Yes, more bizarre. Manuel and Miguel were not uneducated, superstitious men. They were highly skilled electronic technicians. They understood science, circuitry, and logic. They ran a successful business fixing televisions and radios. So why did two rational men leave their families, travel to a distant city, put on lead eye protection, swallow an unknown substance, and lie down in the dirt to die? To understand the end, we have to retrace their final steps. 3 days earlier, on August 17th, Manuel and Miguel tell their wives they're going to Sao Paulo to buy electronic components for work. It is a normal business trip. They pack their bags, grab a significant amount of cash, roughly equivalent to $1,000 today, and board a bus. But they don't go to Sao Paulo. They go to Niterói. They arrive in the afternoon. Their first stop is an electronics store, but they don't buy transistors or wiring. They buy the materials to make the lead masks. Their next stop is a local clothing store. Despite the fact that it's not raining, they purchase 2 identical, brand new, waterproof coats. Finally, they stop at a local bar to buy a bottle of mineral water. They ask the bartender to keep the receipt so they can return the empty bottle the next day and get their deposit back. The waitress who served them water notes something deeply unsettling. She later tells the police that Miguel appeared intensely nervous. He was sweating profusely, and he was obsessively checking his watch, over and over again, checking the time. Because according to the notebook in his pocket, he had to keep a schedule. 16:30, be at the agreed place. They leave the bar and begin the long, grueling hike up the Morro do Vintém. They are never seen alive again. When the police finally bring the bodies of Manuel and Miguel down from the Morro do Vintém, they expect the autopsy to give them the answers the mountain refused to yield. They expect science to slice through the mystery. Instead, science fails them entirely. The recovery of the bodies was a logistical nightmare. Because the terrain was so steep and the brush so thick, and because the initial discovery happened late in the day, the police actually left the bodies on the hill overnight, guarded by a few officers, before attempting extraction the next morning. Then, torrential rain moved in, delaying the process even further. By the time the coroner finally has Manuel and Miguel on the stainless steel tables, the harsh Brazilian elements have taken their toll. Decomposition has set in heavily. The coroner looks for the obvious. Bullet holes? None. Stab wounds? None. Strangulation marks? Blunt force trauma? Signs of struggle? Nothing. The men are physically pristine aside from the decay. The next logical step is a toxicology screen. The notebook explicitly stated, 1830, swallow capsules. The police need to know what was in those capsules. Cyanide, arsenic, a massive overdose of sedatives. But the decomposition of the internal organs is too advanced. The coroner cannot extract viable tissue samples to test for poison. The toxicology report comes back entirely inconclusive. The scientific trail goes ice cold. We will never know what they swallowed on that hill. With pathology offering no answers, the detectives turn to the timeline and the motive. The most grounded, rational theory is robbery. When Manuel and Miguel left their hometown of Campos, they were carrying a substantial amount of cash, 3 million cruzeiros. In 1966, that was enough to buy a brand new car. They told their wives they were going to buy electronics. But when their bodies were found, the money was gone. Only a few small bills were left in their pockets. Did someone lure them to Niterói? Did someone promise them black market components? Or perhaps some rare, illicit goods, only to lead them up a secluded hill, poison them and rob them blind? It is a clean, logical theory, but it completely ignores the terrifying, theatrical reality of the crime scene. A robber might poison you, a robber might steal your money, but a robber does not force you to wear a tailored suit, A robber does not make you put on a heavy hand-cut lead mask, and a robber certainly does not make you write a cryptic schedule about waiting for a mask signal to protect against metals. Or do they? No. Telltale listeners, to understand this scene, we have to look past the money and look into the minds of Manuel and Miguel. We have to look at what they were doing when they weren't fixing televisions. When investigators dig into the personal lives of these two technicians, a bizarre secret world opens up. Manuel and Miguel were deeply involved in a local underground movement. Yes, a sect that blended scientific spiritualism with hardcore ufology. In the 1960s, the space race was dominating the global consciousness. People were looking to the stars, and not just with telescopes, but with a desperate, almost religious fervor. Friends and family revealed that the two men were obsessed with making contact, not with the spirits of the dead, but with the extraterrestrial entities. They believed that these beings were communicating through specific frequencies and light spectrums. They believed that with the right electronic equipment and the right altered state of mind, they could open a doorway. The police searched Manuel's workshop back in Campos. It looks less like a repair shop and more like a mad scientist's laboratory. They find books on scientific spiritualism, they find blueprints for bizarre electronic arrays, and they uncover a chilling piece of history. Just a few months prior, Manuel and Miguel had built a device in their backyard. Witnesses say the device exploded with such force that it shook the neighborhood. Whatever they were trying to build, it was powerful, and it was dangerous. They also found tools and leftover scraps of lead, the exact same lead used to make the masks found on their faces. They didn't buy the masks in Detroit, they manufactured them themselves, specifically for this trip. The puzzle pieces start to form a horrifying otherworldly picture. Manuel and Miguel weren't murdered by a random mugger. They were on a mission, a pilgrimage of sorts. Let's look at the notebook again. 1830 swallow capsules. After effects protect metals, wait for mask signal. In the context of a UFO cult, the instructions take on a terrifying clarity. The capsules were likely psychedelic or highly potent hallucinogenic drugs, perhaps something meant to open their mind or induce a trance state necessary for contact. The lead masks, well, lead is used to protect against radiation and blinding, intense light. They were expecting a craft. They were expecting an entity that emitted an energy so powerful they needed heavy metal shields just to look at it. And the suits, the waterproof coats, they were dressing in their absolute best. They were preparing for an audience. They believed they were going to be chosen, elevated, or perhaps even taken. But there is one final, chilling detail to this case. A detail that elevates it from a tragic story of two misguided cultists overdosing on a hill to a mystery that sends a shiver down the spine of every investigator who touches it. August 17th, the evening they died, while Manuel and Miguel were lying on the Morro de Vintém, wearing their lead masks and waiting in the dark. They were not the only ones who saw something. The police interviewed residents who lived in the neighborhoods surrounding the hill. Multiple unconnected witnesses reported the exact same phenomenon. Around the same time the men were scheduled to swallow their capsules, witnesses looked up at the Morro de Vintém and saw a strange, luminous object in the sky. It was described as round, glowing with a fierce orange light and emitting a halo of bright, unnatural rays. It hovered slightly over the exact area where the bodies were later found, lingering in the sky for several minutes before shooting upward and vanishing into the night. Did Manuel and Miguel see the orange light? Was that the mask signal they were waiting for? Did they swallow the capsules put on the lead and witness something so profoundly impossible that the shock simply stopped their hearts? Or did the entity they were trying to summon actually arrive, taking whatever it was they came to give and leaving two empty vessels behind in the Brazilian dirt? The lead mask case remains entirely unsolved. The money was never found, the capsules were never identified, the orange light was never explained. Two men followed a logic that made perfect sense to them, and it led them straight into the void. But their story is only the beginning of our descent tonight. Manuel and Miguel walked up a hill looking for the stars. Our next subjects drove up a mountain and found only the ice. If the lead mask's case is a mystery of belief, our second case is a mystery of survival. It is a story that has been called the American Dyatlov Pass, a story of 5 young men who abandoned safety, abandoned logic, and marched willingly into a freezing, inescapable tomb. We are leaving the humid jungle of Brazil, listeners. We are heading to the freezing, snow-choked mountains of the Sierra Nevada to the year 1978. Welcome to Yuba County, California. Before we dive into the freezing dark of the Plumas National Forest, Telltale listeners, we need to understand the light that these 5 men came from. Because the tragedy of the Yuba County 5 is not just about where they ended up, but who they were. It is February 24th, 1978, a Friday night. We are in the Sacramento Valley of California, in the twin cities of Marysville and Yuba City. Let me introduce you to the boys. That's what their families called them, the boys, even though they were all grown-up men ranging in age from 24 to 32. There was Ted Weher, 32 years old, a gentle giant who loved to wave at passing cars. There was Jack Madruga, 30, an Army veteran and a proud, meticulous driver. There was Bill Sterling, 29, a deeply religious man who spent hours at the library reading literature to bring home to his mother. There was Jack Hewitt, 24, the youngest of the group, who was shy and looked up to the others like older brothers. And finally, there was Gary Mathias, 25, an Army veteran who had a rougher past, having been diagnosed with schizophrenia during his service in Germany. But Gary was on medication, he was stable, and he was an integral part of the group. What bound these 5 men together was a shared vulnerability. With the exception of Gary, the other 4 men had varying degrees of mild intellectual disabilities. They all lived at home with their parents. They were incredibly sheltered. They did not have girlfriends, they did not go to bars, and they certainly did not take spontaneous, dangerous road trips into the mountains. Their lives were built on routine, and their favorite routine was basketball. They had met through a local support group for disabled adults, and they formed a team called the Gateway Gators. They practiced relentlessly. They were completely obsessed. And on the morning of Saturday, February 25th, the day after our story begins, they were scheduled to play their first game in a week-long Special Olympics tournament hosted by the city. The prize was a free trip to Los Angeles. To say the boys were excited is a massive understatement. Some of them had already laid out their uniform on their beds the night before. Ted Weher had even asked his mother to wash his brand new white sneakers so they would gleam on the court. They were not going to miss this game for the world. But on the Friday night, to hype themselves up, they decided to go watch a college basketball game. UC Davis was playing Chico State. Jack Madruga owned a 1969 turquoise and white Mercury Montego. It was his pride and joy. He drove the boys 50 miles north from Yuba City to Chico. They watched the game, cheering from the bleachers, soaking in the energy of the college crowd. The game ended around 10 p.m. They piled back into the Montego and drove to Bear's Market, a small convenience store in Chico, just a few blocks from the campus. The clerk at Bear's Market remembers them clearly. They were polite, happy, and hungry. They bought standard road trip snacks, a Hostess cherry pie, Langendorf lemon pies, Snickers bars, 2 Pepsi Colas, and a quart of milk. Honestly, folks, that sounds like a delicious night out. It is 10 p.m. They are 50 miles away from home. They have their snacks. They have a massive, highly anticipated basketball tournament the very next morning. The route back to Yuba City is incredibly simple. Highway 99 South. It is a straight, flat, well-paved highway through the valley. A drive they had made before. A drive that should take exactly 1 hour. They get into the turquoise Mercury Montego. Madruga turns the key. The headlights cut through the dark Chico parking lot. And then, well, they simply vanish from the logical world. When the boys do not return home by midnight, their parents start calling each other. By morning, panic sets in. The uniforms are still laid out on the beds. The Gateway Gators take the court without their 5-star players. The police are called. A massive search effort is launched across the Sacramento Valley. For days, they scour the route between Chico and Yuba City. They drag the rivers, assuming Madruga might have fallen asleep at the wheel and driven the Manteiga off the highway into the water. Nothing. Not a trace. It takes 4 days for a break in the case to arrive, and when it does, it makes absolutely no sense. A forest ranger working in the Plumas National Forest is driving up a remote, treacherous, unpaved mountain logging route called the Oroville-Quincy Road. It is miles and miles east of where the men should have been. It is a terrifying road in the summer. In the dead of winter, covered in snow, it is practically a death trap. 70 miles away from Chico, sitting silently at the snowline, is the turquoise 1969 Mercury Montego. The police arrive at the mountain, they look at the car, and the mystery cracks wide open into a terrifying abyss of illogical choices. Let's look at the facts of the vehicle, my listeners. The car was sitting on the dirt road just at the point where the snow became too deep to drive further. The tires had spun slightly in the snow, digging small ruts. But the car was not stuck. Investigators noted that the Montego could have easily been backed out of the ruts by one person pushing while the other reversed. 5 grown men could have pushed it out in seconds. Was the car broken down? No. The police puts the keys in the ignition, and it started immediately. The engine was in perfect working condition. Were they out of gas? No. The tank was a quarter full, enough to leave the engine running for hours to keep the heater on. But the boys were not in the car. The keys were gone. The doors were unlocked. One of the windows was rolled down, exposing the interior to the freezing mountain air. Inside the car, carefully folded on the back seat, were the wrappers from the hostess pies and the empty Pepsi bottles. They had eaten their snacks. They had reached the snow line. And then, for reasons that defy every single human survival instinct, 5 men who hated the cold, men who were wearing light jackets and low-top sneakers, got out of a perfectly functioning gas-filled, heated car, and they walked directly into the pitch-black, freezing wilderness. Why? Why did they drive up Highway 162 in the first place? It was the exact opposite direction of their home. Did Madruga take a wrong turn in Chico? If you missed the turn for Highway 99, you could accidentally end up on 162. But Madruga was a meticulous driver, and even if he made a mistake, 162 winds up in the foothills. The elevation rises, the temperature drops, the flat valleys give way to towering pine trees. You do not accidentally drive 70 miles up a winding mountain dirt road without realizing you are no longer on a flat interstate. Did someone force them up there? The families immediately suspected foul play. The boys were trusting. Did they offer a ride to a hitchhiker in Chico? A hitchhiker with a weapon who forced Madruga to drive into the remote wilderness to rob or murder them? There was no sign of struggle in the car. No blood, no mud on the seats. And then there is the most terrifying theory of all. A psychological collapse. Did something happen on that dark mountain road that terrified them so completely that the freezing forest seemed safer than the warm car? This is where the ghost story elements bleed into the true crime. A few days after the car is found, a witness comes forward, a man named Joseph Stjons. On the exact night the boys vanished, Joseph Stjons was actually on the same mountain road. He was driving up to check on his ski cabin when his own car got stuck in the snow, just a little further up the road from where the Montego were later to be found. While trying to push his car out, Stjons experienced a mild heart attack. Terrified and in agonizing pain, he got back into his car, left the heater running, and lay there in the dark hoping someone would drive by. Around 11:30 p.m., he saw headlights coming up the mountain. He looked out his window. He saw a car parked behind him. He saw a group of men get out. He also claimed he saw a woman holding a baby, though police later believed he might have been hallucinating from the pain and the heart attack. Stjons opened his door and screamed for help. According to Scones, the moment he screamed, the headlights of the other car immediately shut off. The voices stopped. The men fell completely silent. He called out again. Nothing. Absolute, terrifying silence in the dark. A few hours later, Scones saw flashlight beams moving through the trees. He called out again. The flashlights instantly clicked off. Scones stayed in his car until morning, when his pain subsided enough for him to walk 8 miles down the mountain to a lodge. Were the men Scones saw the Yuba County Five? If so, why did they turn their lights off when a man screamed for help? Why did they hide? Did they think Scones was a trap? Did Gary Mathias, suffering from a schizophrenic break in the stress of the wrong turn, convince the other 4 boys that they were being hunted? Did their shared vulnerability create a terrifying feedback loop of paranoia, convincing them that they had to abandon the car and flee into the woods to survive whatever was waiting for them on the road? The mountain kept its secrets for months. The brutal Sierra Nevada winter buried the forest in over a dozen feet of snow. The search parties had to be called off. The parents of the boys waited in agonizing limbo as the winter dragged on into spring. It wasn't until June 4th, 1978, as the snowpack finally began to melt, that a group of weekend motorcyclists riding deep into the Plumas National Forest made a gruesome discovery. 19 miles away from the abandoned Montego, deep in the wilderness, sat a deserted United States Forest Service trailer. And inside that trailer, the mystery of the Yuba County Five would take its final, most inexplicable and horrifying turn. 19 miles. Let that distance sink in. 19 miles through the high Sierra wilderness in the dead of winter, at night, wearing nothing but light jackets and low-top sneakers, through snowdrifts that were in some places waist deep. The route the boys took from the abandoned Mercury Montego was not a straight line. It was a grueling, agonizing march uphill, and it wasn't a panic-stricken sprint through the woods either. They followed the road. They stayed together. But as the days dragged into weeks and weeks into months, the mountain slowly began to yield its terrible secrets. On June the 4th, 1978, a group of weekend motorcyclists were riding dirt bikes near a remote United States Forest Service trailer camp, deep into the Plumas National Forest. The camp was used by forest rangers in the summer and was completely abandoned during the winter. As the bikers approached the main trailer, they noticed a front window had been shattered. One of the bikers approached the broken glass. The smell that hit him was unmistakable. It was the smell of death. When the local sheriff's department breached the door of the trailer, they braced themselves for the worst. But the scene they found inside was not just gruesome. It was a masterclass in psychological horror and illogical human behavior. Lying on a bed inside the trailer was a body. It was wrapped meticulously in 8 heavy blankets from head to toe. 8. When the coroner peeled back the layers of blankets, he found the remains of Ted Weir, the gentle giant who loved to wave at passing cars. The man who had asked his mother to wash his brand new white sneakers for the basketball game. Ted Weir had not frozen to death on the first night. He had not succumbed immediately to the elements. The autopsy revealed a far more horrifying reality. Ted Weir had starved to death. He had lost nearly half his body weight. His feet were severely frostbitten, indicating he had walked a massive distance in the snow before reaching the trailer, and gangrene had set in. The coroner estimated that Ted had lived inside that trailer, slowly starving and suffering, for 8 to 13 weeks. 13 weeks, listeners. Over 3 months in the freezing dark. But here is the detail that breaks the brain of every investigator who have ever looked at this case. The details that turns this tragedy into a terrifying psychological labyrinth. Ted Weir was starving in a room that was full of food. The Forest Service trailer was fully stocked for the winter, just a few feet from the bed where Ted lay wrapped in blankets. There was a storage locker. Inside that locker was dozens and dozens of cans of military-style C rations dehydrated meals, hearty, high-calorie food specifically designed for survival. The locker was unlocked. A few cans had been opened with a P-38 military can opener. Investigators found empty cans of fruit cocktail and ravioli, but the vast majority of the food supply, enough to keep all 5 men alive for a year, was completely untouched. It gets worse. The trailer was equipped with a heavy-duty propane heating system. There was a massive propane tank attached to the outside of the building. To turn the heat on, all someone had to do was step outside and turn a single valve. The valve was never turned. Inside the trailer, scattered around the floor, were matches and paperback books. They had the means to start a fire, but no fire was ever lit. The books were unburned. Ted Weir had laid in that bed for weeks. He was suffering from severe frostbite. He likely couldn't walk. But someone had wrapped him in those 8 blankets. Someone had opened those few cans of fruit cocktails and fed him. Someone had tucked the blankets around his ruined feet in a desperate, loving attempt to keep him warm. Who was it? And why on earth did they stop opening the cans? The immediate conclusion is that the boys, due to their intellectual disabilities, simply didn't understand how to operate the propane heater or didn't realize the sea rations were food because there were no pictures on the labels. But that theory insults their intelligence. These men held jobs. They cooked meals at home. They read literature. And more importantly, Gary Mathias and Jack Madruga were army veterans. They knew exactly what a sea ration was. They knew how to use a P-38 can opener. So why did they stop eating? Why did they choose to freeze and starve in a room full of warmth and calories? This is where the psychological collapse theory becomes terrifyingly plausible. Imagine the scene, Telltale listeners. The 5 men abandoned the perfectly working Montego because they believed they were being hunted, or because Gary, in the throes of a schizophrenic episode triggered by the stress and the missed medication, convinces them of an invisible, catastrophic threat. They march 19 miles up the mountain. They are exhausted, freezing, and terrified. They find the trailer, they break the window to get in, but what if the paranoia didn't stop at the door? What if Gary or one of the others convinced the group that the food was poisoned? What if they believed the propane tank was rigged to explode? What if they believed that if they lit a fire, the smoke would alert whatever monsters were hunting them on the mountain? In the shared delusion, safety becomes the ultimate trap. The sea rations become cyanide. The heater becomes a bomb. The only logical choice, in a mind fractured by terror and freezing temperatures, is to hide under the blankets and wait for rescue. But rescue never came. The discovery of Ted Weir in the trailer was only the first horrifying chapter of the thaw. As the summer sun beats down on the Plymouth National Forest, the snow retreated, revealing the fate of the others. The day after Ted was found, searchers found out from the trailer. A few miles away, on opposite sides of the road they had walked up, they found the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling. They had died of hypothermia long before reaching the trailer, but their positions were strange. They were not huddled together for warmth. They were lying parallel to the road, as if they had simply laid down to sleep. 2 days later, Jack Hewitt's father joined the search. He found his son's remains, just a backbone and some clothing, scattered by animals under a manzanita bush at a short distance from the trailer. Jack Hewitt's blue jeans and shoes were later found inside the trailer, suggesting he had made it to the shelter with Ted, but had left again. Why? To find help? Or because he, too, was consumed by the paranoia and fled the trap of the trailer? But there is one piece of the puzzle that remains entirely missing, the piece that haunts the families and the investigators to this day. Gary Mathias was never found. His shoes were found in the trailer. Ted Weir's leather shoes, which were slightly larger, were missing. Investigators believe Gary took Ted's shoes after his own feet swelled from the cold and walked out into the wilderness alone. But where did he go? He was without his schizophrenia medication for over 3 months. Did he walk until he collapsed, his body forever hidden, undiscovered ravine? Or did he survive? Did he somehow make it off the mountain, abandoning his friends to their frozen tomb and disappear into the ether? There have been unconfirmed sightings of Gary Mathias over the years, but nothing concrete. He remains a ghost of Plymouth National Forest. We are left standing at the edge of two profound, terrifying abysses. On one side of the world, in the humid, tangled jungles of Brazil, two men in tailored suits put on masks of heavy lead and swallow poison, waiting for a light in the sky. On the other side of the world, in the freezing, suffocating snowdrifts of the high Sierra, 5 young men abandon a perfectly functioning heated car to walk 19 miles into a wilderness of ice, only to starve to death in a room full of untouched food. These are not just unsolved mysteries, my wonderful listeners. These are fundamental breakdowns in the architecture of human survival. When we look at true crime, we are usually looking for a monster. A serial killer hiding in the shadows, a syndicate operating outside the law, a jealous lover with a weapon. We want there to be a villain because a villain is something we can understand. A villain has a motive. A villain has a physical form that can be caught, locked away, and punished. But what happens when the monster isn't a person? What happens when the monster is a fractured idea? Let us compare the logic of the dead. Manuel and Miguel, the men of the lead masks, did not die out of panic, they died out of absolute, terrifying conviction. Their demise was meticulously planned. They bought the coats, they kept the receipts for the water bottle, they cut the lead with their own hands, they wrote down the timeline in a notebook. They weren't running away from a threat, they were walking toward a promise. The human mind has an astonishing capacity for belief. Belief can build cathedrals. It can start revolutions, but it can also convince two rational, educated, electronic technicians that the only way to ascend to a higher plane of existence or to make contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence is to shut off their own biological functions. Their logic map was perfectly intact. It was just operating on a completely alternate reality. In their minds, swallowing those capsules wasn't suicide. It was a doorway. The lead masks weren't a bizarre costume. They were necessary safety equipment for the blinding truth they were about to witness. The tragedy of Vintém Hill is the tragedy of a mind that has completely surrendered to the unknown. They died because they believed the universe had something better to offer them than the life they left behind in Campos. But the tragedy of the Yuba County 5 is entirely different. The boys in the Plumas National Forest did not die out of conviction. They died out of pure, unadulterated terror. Manuel and Miguel walked toward the light. The Yuba County 5 ran blindly in the dark. Think about the spatial impossibility of their final night. They are sitting in the Mercury Montego. The heater is blasting. They have just eaten their hostess pies. They are safe. But something happens. Something shatters their perception of safety so violently that the freezing, unforgiving wilderness outside suddenly seems like the better option. Was it the witness, Joseph Scons, screaming for help from his stranded car down the road? In the pitch black, did his agonizing cries sound like a threat? If Gary Mathias was experiencing a schizophrenic break, the stress of being lost on a mountain road could have easily warped Scons' cries for help into the sounds of a hunting party. When paranoia takes hold, especially a shared paranoia, a folie à deux, or in this case a folie à cinque, logic is the first thing to die. The human brain, when flooded with absolute terror, stops processing complex information. It devolves to its most primitive state. The lizard brain takes over. Danger, run, hide. They abandoned the car because the car was a box, and a box is a trap. They marched 19 miles up the mountain because they believed whatever was behind them was far worse than the ice beneath their feet. And then the ultimate failure of logic, the Forest Service trailer. For Ted Weir, Jack Hewitt, and possibly Gary Mathias, the trailer should have been their salvation. It was shelter, it was dry. It was stocked with a year's worth of military survival rations and a massive tank of propane gas. But the paranoia followed them inside. Why didn't they turn on the heat? Why didn't they light a fire? Because fire creates light creates smoke, and light and smoke are beacons. If you believe you're being hunted by something in the woods, you do not light a beacon. You sit in the freezing dark and hope the monsters walk past your door. Why didn't they eat the food? Why did Ted Weir slowly starve to death, shedding half his body weight over 13 agonizing weeks, while perfectly good, high-calorie food sat in an unlocked locker just a few feet away? Perhaps, to a mind fractured by terror, the food looked like a trap. Perhaps the military packaging of the sea rations confused them, or perhaps the delusion was so strong that they believed the food was poisoned by whatever had chased them up the mountain. Or perhaps, in the darkest, most tragic scenario of all, Ted Weir simply gave up. Imagine the psychological torture of those final weeks. Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling are dead on the road. Jack Hewitt has wandered off into the snow and has never returned. Gary Mathias is gone. Ted Weir, the gentle giant, is entirely alone. His feet are blackened by frostbite. The cold is seeping into his bones. He is wrapped in 8 heavy blankets, but no blanket can keep warm a body that has no fuel to burn. At a certain point, the human body stops sending hunger signals. The pain of starvation dulls into a numb, creeping exhaustion. The brain, starved of calories, begins to hallucinate. Did Ted Weir spend his final days dreaming of the basketball court in Yuba City? The Yuba County 5 died not because they were murdered, but because their internal compasses were violently demagnetized by fear. They were victims of a geographical and psychological perfect storm. 2 mysteries, 2 hills, 2 catastrophic failures of human logic. In Brazil, the logic of ascension. In California, the logic of terror. The police in Nitroy still occasionally pull the lead masks file, staring at the cryptic handwriting, wondering what protect metals truly meant. The notebook sits in the evidence box, a Rosetta Stone for a language of madness no one else can read. To me, tale-hunting listeners, protect metals sounds like they were metals that literally protected them from the sunbeam or the light emitting from the UFO. That's how I see it. Protect metals, metals that protect, quite literal. The police in Yuba County still keep Gary Mathias on their active missing persons list, a ghost wandering the High Sierra, wearing a pair of stolen leather shoes, entirely divorced from the reality he left behind in 1978. We listen to these stories because they scare us in the way that ghosts and demons can't. They scare us because they prove that the most dangerous place in the universe isn't a dark alley or a haunted house. The most dangerous place in the universe is the fragile, easily broken circuitry of the human mind. Thank you, my amazing listeners. That's you. That's you on the other end. Thank you for walking into the dark with me on this massive double feature. If you survive the journey, please make sure you hit the subscribe button. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple's Podcasts or Spotify, and share this episode with a friend who appreciates a true psychological mystery. It is the absolute best way to support the show and ensure we can keep digging up these stories. And speaking of the incredible support that keeps the microphone on and the shadows at bay, I need to take a moment to thank the inner circle of our Patreon family. To my jaw-dropping, special and unique friend, my Ode Night Tea Titan, Matto Star. Matto, my friend, I want to say a huge, massive thank you for your jaw-dropping support and your limitless kindness. It means the absolute world to me. And I have to ask you, after sitting through this deep dive, where do your instincts lean on the lead masks? As someone who appreciates the finer details, what on earth do you think protect metals meant in that notebook? Do you agree with me, mate? And do you think Gary Mathias ever made it off that mountain? I really want to know your theory. What are your thoughts? And Matto, thank you immensely for your generosity as always. Just colossal. Just the words were taken out of my mouth. Or I guess the words were ripped out of my mind. Thank you immensely, mate. You are a superstar. Have a brilliant week ahead. And I'll be reaching out to you this week as well. So keep an eye on the DMs. Thank you, Matto. And I'll be in touch. I also want to send a massive, shadowy thank you and huge hug to my brilliant White Tea Warlords.
White Tea Warlords!
To Lesosaurus Rex, an incredible friend and supporter. You know the physical limits of the human body from your time crushing it at the gym. Can you even fathom the adrenaline and sheer terror it would take to push a 19-mile hike uphill in waist-deep snow, wearing low-top sneakers? Goodness gracious. Mate, you're probably at the gym again. A huge high five and a massive one-up to gains. Please do 5 more of your hardest exercise just to push the envelope on my behalf. Have a fantastic week, and thank you for being such a strong pillar of this community and my friend. Have a brilliant week ahead. To my next White Tea Warlord Maya, my friend, supporter, and the undisputed queen of the cats, I hope your feline familiars keep you safe and comfortable at home while we wandered through the freezing, unforgiving wilderness of the Plymouth National Forest. The comfort of home has never felt so vital, right? Keep warm with your feline friends, Maya, and thank you for your support. Have a great week ahead. And my next White Tea Warlord Sangeetha, friend, supporter, and our resident seer, with your intuition, I need to know if your inner eye caught a glimpse of the chilling Sierra of the Yuba County 5. Your insights are always valuable. Thank you for being here, supporting me, and sharing your sight with us. Have an epic week ahead. And finally, a massive shout out to my Earl Grey enforcers. Thank you for standing guard on the perimeter, holding the line, and keeping this community strong. Your unwavering support gives me the absolute freedom to dive into these chilling rabbit holes week after week. I couldn't do this without you. I am lucky to have the following Patreon supporters: Earl Grey enforcers and onwards. Chad Warren, Peter Raffaelli, Just Heather, Juicebox Andy, Divided by Zero, Paige Kramer, Jane Gumnick, Michael Krupp, and Steve the Creeper. You are all marvelous. And another big thank you to my White Tea Warlords, and a colossal hug and high five to my own Night Tea Titan, Matto Star. Until next time, keep your digital footprint secure, trust your instincts, and remember, the world is full of ghosts and not all of them are dead. I am the Tale Teller, and you've been listening to Stories, Fables, Ghostly Tales. Good night.
Two men walking up a jungle hill in tailored suits when the wind was still, looking for a light that the world couldn't see, searching for a door to eternity. They cut the heavy metal just to shield their eyes, waiting for a signal from the darkening sky. So we don't know the words that the heavens said, but they lay down to sleep in a better lead. Oh, where does the compass point when the needle breaks? What is the final path that a wandering heart takes beyond the edge of the map where the shadows grow? There are secrets in the trees, there are whispers in the snow. We hold your memory, we carry your names in the quiet of the dark where the mystery remains. for listening, you amazing listeners. I want to thank my out and IT Titan, Matto Star, the most amazing supporter, and special pal of mine. And your days be full of joy. And a huge thank you to my white tea warlords and friends of mine. Lezosaurus, my gym genius. Maya, my queen of cats. And Sangeetha, the seer that sees all. And to all my Earl Grey enforcers and tears thereafter, all my love to you all. See you soon.